So welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. And my guest today is Theo Fleury. So you probably know who Theo is, but if you don't, he was one of the Flames leading scorers for years in the NHL. Also has a best-selling book called Playing with Fire, where he talks about his struggles with mental health and addiction. And welcome to the show, Theo.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
Well, I know that, I did do a little bit of a brief introduction, but I'm not sure if you just want to tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself and who you are before we kind of get started.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think everybody's familiar with my hockey career. But what was it? In 2009, I sort of stepped into what I'm doing right now. And that's, I work in the field of trauma, mental health, and addiction, because obviously I have my own story. And, you mentioned the book, Playing with Fire, that was released in 2009. And that's when I really sort of, stepped into this healing journey and healing path that I've been on for the last, number of years. And it's probably been the most rewarding thing that I've done in my life, and had the opportunity to help many people on their own journeys. And, I'm an advocate and an activist in this space. And, it seems like every day, all day long, we fight stigma, right? And, bringing it to a current event, you got Simone Biles yesterday who came out and, basically said, I didn't have it. And, we're seeing all the negative stuff coming out because she actually took care of herself, and again, apparently that's wrong. But, and so, the biggest epidemic on the planet is trauma, mental health, and addiction. There's nothing bigger than that. And, fancy me being the guy that's right in the middle of it all, trying to, get rid of stigma and make people feel more comfortable and be okay with, talking about it.
Yeah. And I mean, for a guy who's, won a Stanley Cup, won gold medal at the Olympics, to say that, the most rewarding thing you've done is to do this work is, I think a pretty powerful statement, and probably, surprising to some people, but maybe not so surprising to people who are, who work in mental health and addiction themselves, but, we kind of very, very briefly chatted before the show, like, why are there so many, NHL hockey players, do you feel, that struggle with mental health and addiction in particular?
Well, I don't think we can define it to one particular group. I think it's, like I said, it's the biggest epidemic on the planet, and, I think we've done a really good job of bringing awareness that the fact that mental health is a big issue. Mm-hmm. Addiction is a big issue. But what we always forget is the catalyst, which brings us into those spaces, and that's trauma, right? Nobody talks about trauma. There's no space for trauma in the world, right? And COVID-19 is the most traumatic thing that's happened since World War II. So all of a sudden we see a spike in mental illness, we see a spike in suicide, we see a spike in opioid overdoses, we see a spike. Well, it all comes back to trauma, right? Because when you isolate people and you take away community, that's trauma. And, even if you look at epigenetics, like if you look at epigenetics and DNA, we all carry trauma from past, that gets passed down from generation to generation, right? So, we're all either part of all the world wars, the Holocaust, the residential school, right? So we all carry trauma, right? And so Um, and a lot of people don't understand that piece of it, right? And so, you know, COVID-19 just added another layer of trauma onto our already traumatized, you know, people. And so, yeah, that's why you're seeing people, you know, going through whatever they're going through at this time. And so, and to me, ultimately, it comes down to vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is the key to all of this. And, you know, in 2009, I wrote that book in the most vulnerable way I could possibly write a book. And what happened was I got run over, right? I got run over by people who had the same experience as me, who had never talked about it before. And they saw me as a safe person, a safe place, because they knew they weren't going to be judged, they weren't going to be ridiculed. I was just going to, you know, embrace them and hug them and you know, show them compassion, show them empathy, and all those things. And when you do that for people, they can turn their lives around pretty quickly.
Yeah,
There's not enough of that going on. Not enough.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And one thing too that I think you know, you kind of said in a roundabout way, that is like trauma is the ultimate gateway drug. You know, like people have always been trying to, you know, pin it on something. You know, some people pin it on, you know, probably cannabis is the biggest one. Some people say, you know, alcohol or tobacco, but you know, it all stems from trauma. Like trauma is the gateway drug. That's why people seek out these other substances. You know, so and I think that that's something that's not, you know, discussed as much, like you said, like the
Well, it's
blame.
not discussed at all. You
Yeah,
know,
the blame is always put on the drug, and like even when you look at, you know, I point sometimes to a couple different studies that you're probably aware of, but like in the Vietnam War, where they had U.S. soldiers who were addicted to opium,
yeah,
and you know, when they came back, only about 15% of people remained addicted. And that's, you know, that's like staggering, like a number. I mean, if you go to a clinic anywhere in Canada and you try to get, you know, 85% of people off of opioids, it's almost impossible. So,
yep,
you know, why did it happen there? Because they changed their environment, and that trauma that they were enduring when they were there, they needed it. But then
yeah,
when that trauma was removed, then they didn't need it anymore.
yeah,
And they've done the same thing in rats and
yeah,
mice as well. You're probably familiar with this study where, you know, yes, if you give, you know, rats cocaine and that's the only thing they have, they're gonna eat the
yeah,
cocaine.
yeah,
But if you give them like a nice rat environment where there's lots of, you know, hamster wheels or whatever for them to play with and other rats to play with, they don't go seek the cocaine. So, you know, that's something that we're not discussing as much, and something that I think, you know, should be discussed a lot more, is that ultimately it's the trauma that is the gateway that's leading people to their addiction.
yeah, absolutely. Because how else am I going to suppress emotional pain that's silent, that nobody can see, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I look at, you know, the bar scene as a place where people go to deal with their trauma,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a perfect setup, right? Because you can drink as much as you want, you can fall down, you can all that, and it's acceptable.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Somebody who's that annihilated, there's an underlying problem, there's an underlying condition, right? Because you know, normal people don't need that, right?
yeah,
So
exactly. And
yeah,
if you're okay with yourself, I mean, all addiction just stems from really not feeling the way that you want to feel right now.
yeah,
So if you're, you know, not happy with the way that you're going to feel, then you're going to reach for something.
yeah,
But if you are happy with the way that you feel, then it's not even in your mind to like reach for another drug,
yeah,
you know. And I think that we should, you know, be discussing that, you know, quite a bit more, instead of just focusing on the drug itself and then blaming the drug for the person's behavior, when is really happening is trauma is what has fueled this person's behavior. And
yeah,
then yes, when you add drugs on top of that, that can exacerbate it and make it worse, but
yeah,
it's certainly not the root cause. And going back again, if you remove the drug and the trauma's still there, then you're basically still going to have the same life and you're going to likely relapse.
yes. course.
You know,
And the big word is drug, right? Because big pharma owns every disease on the planet. They own it, right? And, you know, we're all subjected to trusting the doctor, right? The doctor says, take this, we're going to take it because we've been conditioned to trust, right? And, you know, what I've learned is I've learned to advocate for myself and ask questions. Like, why are you giving me this drug? Where, you know, what part of my brain is it going to, you know, turn on, and which part is it going to turn off, and what are the side effects and all that? And I would say 9 times out of 10, the doctors don't know. The people that are prescribing these, you know, synthetic versions of, you know, chemistry have no clue. You know, they're just looking at the symptoms, looking on their chart and saying, oh, yeah, this guy needs Prozac, this guy needs Zoloft, this guy. No, you know, and, you know, I come from the holistic space, right? Everything that I've done that has made me significantly better has happened in the holistic environment, right?
Okay.
And to me, the cheapest, most effective type of therapy that I've come across is a little thing called group therapy, which is community. You build a community of people who are all trying to achieve the same goal, which is peace, joy, happiness, and serenity. That's the ultimate goal in the mental health space. Is it possible? Absolutely 100%. But you have to build these communities of vulnerability, safety, trust, compassion, empathy. You know, that's what you need to build, right? And when you build these types of environments, people thrive. It's unbelievable, you know?
Yeah. So,
and that's what I've been doing. That's what I've been doing for the last, you know, 15 years is I've been educating myself. So talking to people like you who you know, are experts in this field, and learning from them and asking the right questions and all of that. And, you know, then taking all that information and giving it to my audience, because they're not getting the right information. They're getting, you have mental illness, you need medication. Well, no, I would say, you know, bipolar, schizophrenia, these types of, you know, afflictions need medication. But for general anxiety, general depression, these kind of things, there are 10,000 different ways holistically to overcome mental illness.
Yeah, I think that we definitely need to you know, focus more on lifestyle interventions for mental health. And you know, one thing that I always advocate on, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult, is to implement, though, is exercise, because exercise has been shown over and over again to be incredible for mental health. Yeah. The problem with exercise,
I think people get scared by the word exercise, so I just say move. Just move. Like move, you know?
Yeah, and that's a good point too, because what I was going to say is that, you know, the problem with exercise, that some people, you know, they may get to a point where they're so depressed that they literally you know, can't exercise, or they don't want to exercise. And
yeah, you're talking to me, right? That's the hardest thing for me to do, is exercise, right?
Yeah. Because so yeah, like so what do you do, Theo, when you don't feel like exercise? But
I play golf. I play golf every day. That's my meditation. That's my medication. That's my everything. Because, you know, I'm outside, so I'm getting vitamin D, which is essential.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm meditating, because the whole entire object of golf is to hit the golf ball in the middle of the golf club every time. And it takes a lot of being present to be able to do that. And I play golf with my dad and my 2 boys. So there's relationship, right? So it encompasses a lot of things that, you know, that I need on a daily basis, right? And the time I struggle the most is in the wintertime, when I got nothing to do, right? That's when the depression really, you know, kicks my ass. And it's really hard for me to get on a stationary bike and ride the bike because, I spent 40 years of my life doing exactly that. I don't want to do that anymore,
Yeah.
So I can't play hockey anymore because I'm so injured and I have so much arthritis and pain all the time. It's hard.
Yeah, and I imagine too, like, that's a good point too that you mentioned about the pain, because a lot of people who struggle with mental health, unfortunately, also have chronic pain, and people with chronic pain struggle with mental health is something that kind of
Yeah,
goes.
because it kicks up the anxiety, right?
Yeah,
Physical pain kicks up emotional pain, right?
yeah,
And the
and
brain doesn't decipher between the two. The brain doesn't know if it's physical or emotional pain. It just knows that you're in pain,
yeah,
right?
I have a lot of patients with PTSD, and they say that when they get when their pain kicks in, their anger kicks in, and then
Yeah.
irritability kicks in, and they kind of start to lose control. So it's I think, like, it's just one important point to note, because sometimes people don't realize how often or how much pain affects their mental health. So if you are someone who suffers from mental health and you're in chronic pain, by fixing your chronic pain, you can absolutely, also improve your mental health in that way.
Yeah.
But
Well, and
just
that's where the CBD products come in, right? Because they're really good at helping with chronic pain.
and is that something that you use quite frequently?
Yeah, I take 150 milliliters in
150 milligrams, probably.
milligrams, yeah,
Yeah.
in the morning, 150 at night. So
Okay.
it helps me sleep too, right?
Okay.
So yeah,
Excellent.
so,
And
yeah, it's been great.
do you use any THC, or just use CBD?
Yeah, it's got a tiny bit of THC. Yeah,
Okay.
because I also have Crohn's disease, and reading all the information of CBD and THC combination helps, inflammation as well. So yeah, it's been very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you like, when did you start using CBD?
Probably around the time the pandemic hit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just over a year ago, year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And did you find that, like, right now, Theo, like, do you still ever get like cravings, and you find that CBD helps with those cravings, or?
No, I'm done. I've done my work.
Okay.
The obsession's gone.
So how long now have you been completely sober for?
Let me just check on my app here. 5,791 days.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's quite the achievement. So, I guess the big question is like, how did you do it? How did you become clean? Because a lot of people who have been in your situation, when they've been addicted to alcohol, and I think alcohol and cocaine, I think, were the big
Yeah.
the big two for you.
Yeah.
How did you overcome that addiction?
Well, I knew I was going to die eventually, and I didn't want to die. What was it? 16 years ago, I had a fully loaded pistol in my mouth, ready to pull the trigger. Not because I wanted to die, but because I was exhausted from living in emotional pain and suffering. And, that really was sort of an exercise that needed to happen because, I made the choice to live, but I also knew that I couldn't live the way that I was living, right? Because I was just coping, right? And I hadn't really took a look at my trauma, right? And, a big part of, and I would say the biggest part of my recovery is spirituality, is that, 5,791 days ago, I hit my knees in a washroom and I surrendered. And I turned my will and my life over to the care of God, Allah, Buddha, Jehovah, fucking universe, whatever the hell you want to call it. And, that's what gets me through, is my faith and my belief that, there's something. I'm not running the show anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't want to run the show, because when I run the show, it's a big shit show. Right.
Yeah.
And part of the surrender, and I said, please take away this obsession. And I woke up the next day and haven't had a drink or a drug since. But I've also worked really hard, probably done 10,000 hours of therapy and done, every kind of therapy known to mankind, right? And if you don't do the work, you're not going to get better. It's as simple as that. And, there's a certain amount of willingness on my part that I was going to do whatever it took to get to that peace, joy, happiness, and serenity. And I have experienced, periods of peace and joy and happiness and serenity. And, that's what keeps me going. That's what gets me out of bed. And then I get to help people, right? Ultimately, that has been a huge catalyst too, is helping is healing, right? The more people I've helped, the more I've healed myself, because, I see myself in them. And I see them in the struggle, and I see that I'm no longer there, which means that, hey, I am getting better and things are improving, and I just need to keep doing the next right thing.
Yeah. So when you see someone, because, you've suffered yourself, it's a lot easier for you to identify suffering in someone else. And then
Yeah. It's called
that,
compassion. It's called compassion. There's not enough compassion in the world,
Yeah.
It's, it's, the messaging that we're getting is all fear-based, which is calculated, I believe, because when you have people living in fear, they're a lot easier to control,
Mm-hmm.
and me being a person who was sexually abused for a long time knows what manipulation looks like, knows what it feels like, knows what it tastes like, all that stuff. And so that's what we're seeing on a daily basis. It's being played out in real time. And, the most powerful addiction on the planet is the addiction to power.
I agree.
Yeah. And we're seeing that played out by every single leader in the free world, right? They're addicted to power.
Yeah. Once you get addicted to power, it's something that it's very, very hard to relinquish, I guess, for a lot of people. And I think that, once they go so far, it's kind of difficult to kind of, go
Yeah,
back.
I would say it's very difficult to recover from that kind of addiction.
Mm-hmm. And then just specifically too, Theo, like, what did you do? Like, I know that you had that epiphany moment and you woke up the next day, said that, you're not going to, do drugs anymore. But like, what did you do, like the days and weeks after that, and how has it changed now? I mean, I imagine now, your daily practice of spirituality is vastly different than when it began. So, can you kind of guide us through that journey a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I just started praying, started doing some meditation in the morning. And then,
Like, do you have a particular faith that you?
No.
Okay.
I believe in bits and pieces of everything,
Okay. Okay.
And I made it my own, right? That's, and I learned that in 12 step, right? And about 5 years into my sobriety, I hit a wall, and I was like, if this is what sobriety is, I might as well drink, because I was acting like a drunk anyways. I was still angry, resentful. I still had the ism, right?
Yeah.
I still had the ism. And then realized that the first 3 steps in the program is about spirituality, which I skipped right over, right? And so for the last 10 years, I've been on a spiritual journey, trying to learn, and learn about meditation, learn about manifestation, learn about yoga, learn about breathing, going to functional medicine doctors, and, going to acupuncture, and, all that kind of stuff. And ultimately I started to get better. But where I've made the biggest strides was, I'm a speaker. And so, I've been to 420 of the 630 First Nations communities in Canada. And, I was there to help them, but they helped me more than I helped them, because they introduced me to spirituality. Okay. And, so I started participating in ceremony, smudge, sweat lodge, powwow, drumming, singing, dancing, all these things. And my life went to the next level of consciousness. And
Yeah. And the drumming and singing and dancing, that's something that's often done in a lot of, psychedelic
yeah,
circles.
yeah,
Like I don't know too much about, ayahuasca. I've never experienced it or anything like that, but, I know a little bit about it, and I understand that when they go to these ceremonies, there is a lot of like singing and dancing and stuff like that. And I don't know if you're familiar with Hamilton Morris, but he had said one time when he did ibogaine, there was a lot of similar kind of
yeah,
events going on, singing and dancing and stuff. And he said, it wasn't probably then just the ibogaine that was helping him. It was like the fact that he had this like intense
yeah,
community around him, right? So
yes,
I could see how that could definitely be helpful. And then the other thing too, you mentioned too about the 12-step program, and I forget which step it is. It's one of the first ones where you're supposed to basically surrender to a higher power type of thing. And it's important for people to know that I know that one of the founders of AA described himself as like a staunch agnostic. Like he was not
yeah,
a believer in God.
yeah,
So you don't have to believe in God or believe in religion to surrender to a
no,
higher power, so to speak.
yeah,
Right? So I think that it's important for people to know that, and I mean, you seem to be one of them. You don't have to be attached to a religion to surrender to a higher
no,
power, or to know that, some things are out of your control. And I mean, that should provide an intense amount of relief.
yeah,
It shouldn't, make you feel anxious.
yeah.
And,
Well, and practicing spirituality also lights up the right side of your brain,
right.
where dopamine, serotonin, all that good stuff that our brain produces, we get that when we're practicing spirituality, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess,
The same neurotransmitters that cocaine and opioids and all that lights up as well, right? So, there's a direct correlation between, and ultimately, what is relationship? Relation or spirituality is relationship. That's what it is.
yeah,
Relationship I have with myself, first and foremost. If I have a good relationship with myself, I love myself, take care of myself, all those things, how do you think all my other relationships are going to be? Exactly the same. They're not going to be combative and, volatile, violent, all these things, right?
yeah, it's getting to a place where, like, you love yourself, you love life, so you love everything,
Yeah,
like no matter what happens, you kind of love it. Whereas when you're in a place where you're sort of angry all the time, then everything kind of makes you angry. It doesn't really, it doesn't matter
yeah.
what it
And
is, right?
that's and
So
that's adrenaline, right? That's adrenaline. Anger produces adrenaline. So a lot of people get addicted to adrenaline, right?
yes, yeah,
And that's a chemical we produce in our body.
yeah,
Right?
people
We
can
have
definitely get
access
addicted
to
to
it.
adrenaline.
We have access to it almost immediately, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
And one question, I wanted to point out too is that, there's something called, functional depression, or, functional alcoholism. Jordan Peterson's talked about this quite a bit. And, I believe I'm right when I'm saying that when you checked into rehab, weren't you the leading scorer in the NHL?
I was close. Yeah, I was
I
close.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
I don't know. At the time, I if I vaguely remember, I thought you were actually the leader at that time, which is
right.
means like, arguably at the time you were, the best hockey player in the world. And then you got, checked into, rehab, which doesn't make sense for a lot of people. So, can you just speak a little bit on, functional depression and how you were able to still, put up so many points, despite the fact that you were struggling internally?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm just one of those people that was made differently than everybody else. But
Yeah.
functioning, I was not functioning at all.
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
I always laugh at people say, I'm a high functioning this and I'm a high functioning that. No, you're not. You're lying to yourself. you know,
Yeah.
you know, You're in that river in Egypt phase, denial.
So you're in kind of like non-functioning, but still able to,
Yeah,
score.
but what did I do? What did I do my whole entire life? I played hockey. So when I stepped on the ice, I didn't have to think.
Yeah.
I was reacting because I had spent so much time practicing that I never had to think. That's why I was so good, is I never had to think. And I could park everything that was going on because the rink was my happy place. Dopamine, serotonin, I got all this incredible chemistry that my brain cannot produce when I'm not there, when I'm not in that environment. That's why when I left the rink, that's when I had the most trouble, because it stopped producing dopamine, stopped producing serotonin, all these chemicals. So I had to go outside. Well, what's cocaine? Dopamine, right? Yeah. Cocaine is dopamine.
Blocks the uptake of dopamine is exactly what it does.
Yeah. So, I was just trying to function as good as I possibly could, but eventually, you're going to crash and burn. And that's what happened for me, right? And I was high risk at that time. So the league did what they should have done, is they put me in a place to start to look at my trauma, right? Yeah. Because that's what was underlying all of the behavior, was the trauma. Unresolved trauma.
And I know a lot of it, probably stems from Graham James, but was there also just physical trauma from
concussion? Oh, for sure. Yeah, I had concussion problems, and which brought on a lot of depression, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I was messed up, and I grew up in a home. Both my parents were, struggled with addiction as well, right? So, there was a lot of underlying layers of trauma.
Right, because your mother was she had Valium in her system when you were born, is that right?
Yeah.
So that kind of put you.
I was predestined to look for outside stuff to help me function.
And when you were on the Rangers and and you checked yourself in, like, did your other teammates know what was going on, or
nobody knew?
Nobody had any idea, hey?
No, I was one of those high functioning.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it, at the time, because people would, make, inappropriate jokes, being like, man, like, Fleury just needs to go back to what he's doing so he can just put up, points again. But, which is obviously a very, very insensitive comment to
right.
make. But,
it's typical because, that's part of the stigma, right?
Yeah.
Is that, I don't even know what the word is, but, shame, I guess. Shame, they add to the shame, I was full of shame,
And do you feel too, like, being in a hockey environment, which is, is traditionally like a macho type of environment, do you feel like that kind of makes it more difficult for players to talk about sensitive subjects like mental health?
100%. They consider being vulnerable as a weakness, right? And your opponents, expose your weaknesses, right? So you have to be,
So if you have depression, you're a pussy, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Get over it.
Right. Yeah. And that's obviously, not a very compassionate or empathetic environment. Like, have you ever thought of, getting involved?
The whole entire world's like that. Hockey, like sports is part of the big piece of pie here, right?
Right.
The whole entire world treats this exactly the same,
I don't think
there's no one particular entity that is worse than others. It's the reason why this is the biggest epidemic on the planet, is because hey, you got depressing, you're a fucking pussy. Well, that's the way guys talk to each other, in the real world.
Yeah. And the same thing too. I think if you're injured, it's just like, suck it up. Here's a couple Advils, go
Yeah.
play,
Yeah.
and
We used to get concussions. They used to tape aspirin to our forehead and get out there. Right.
Yeah.
But we also didn't know the long-term effects that this was going to have either. Right. So,
And are you kind of doing any work with the NHL now to kind of change that environment or change that culture? So
they
players
don't want any part of me.
Got you.
Yeah. So,
well, hopefully, some people who, struggle with the same things that you struggle with, you're playing, or maybe listening to this or listening to other podcasts where they can, find a little bit of, find something that makes them feel like they can, chat with someone else, and that it makes them feel a little bit.
What I always tell people that are struggling with the stigma is, if you suffer from mental illness, guess what? You're in the majority. You're not in the minority.
I agree.
Every single human being on the planet at some point in their life is going to have some sort of mental health struggle.
Yeah.
It's called being part of humanity, and being part of life is you're going to experience trauma, and that trauma is going to leave you in emotional pain and suffering. And that emotional pain and suffering is mental illness,
I agree. And I agree too that, just because you don't have a diagnosis of depression or anxiety or PTSD doesn't mean that you don't have any.
That's the problem. That's the problem. Why are we continually attaching labels and making up fucking stupid phrases so that people, have an excuse, right? It doesn't matter what it is. How do I heal from this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's no messaging, and there's no messaging.
So try and focus on the solution.
I have a label and I have a medication. That's it. Yeah. We all know that the medication is only a temporary band-aid for a bigger problem.
Yeah, we definitely need to do a better job of combining, pharmaceutical interventions with lifestyle interventions.
Well, and the psychedelics are going to do that. They're going to change the landscape of mental health forever.
Yeah.
Why? Why? Because they come in their natural state. Nobody's fucked with them. It's Mother Earth's gift to us.
And I wanted to ask you about that as well.
And we need to treat it that way.
So, like, when you say you're sober for, I forget the figure now, but it's over 5,000 days. That's from alcohol and from cocaine. Is it also from all psychedelic drugs, or do you use psychedelics?
I haven't tried any of the psychedelics, but I'm certainly really excited about it.
Okay.
Very excited about it.
Okay. Just because I know there's guys, like, I know in particular, like Eminem and Russell Brand are the only two I can really think of off the top of my head, that once they became sober, from what I understand, they've never ever used anything whatsoever since that time, like in a psychoactive form.
Right.
And right now you're saying that, you haven't used anything psychoactive in over 5,000 days.
Yeah, but if I'm microdosing it, isn't that called medication?
Yeah, you can definitely call microdosing
exactly
medication.
But if I'm macrodosing every single day, yeah, then I'm back on the train.
So you are then open to using psychedelic?
100%.
Okay.
Just read all the studies that are coming out.
I agree.
My brain is damaged. My brain is damaged. And if there is a holistic version of, a pure medication that I can take under the supervision, under the guidance, yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. And like we, again, very briefly chatted before the show, that's what Dan Carcel, he used magic mushrooms, so psilocybin, and it really helped him.
Life.
And one thing too is that, you know, in particular for someone like yourself or anyone who suffers, you know, from mental health and concussions, there's also, you know, some evidence that psilocybin can help with TBIs, or traumatic brain injuries. You know, there's
Yeah.
not as much evidence for that as there say is for mental health, but there's still quite a bit. So, you know, not only are you treating your mental health, you're also treating, you know, the physical trauma that's been, you know, impeded on you through your career, right?
Yeah.
So very important. And I just wanted to know, just because I know that there's some people, and like, and again, I can't speak for them, but I'm pretty sure like Eminem and Russell Brand have said that like they're never ever going to use anything ever again. But I'm not sure if that's, you know, always the best approach. And sometimes, you know, it is helpful to use other psychoactive substances like psychedelics to get off other substances. And that sounds a little bit counterintuitive to some people, but, you know, there is, you know, a lot of
Yeah, but
medical.
that's from people who are very uneducated. You know what I mean? That are not willing to do their own work, right? You know, they have a certain mindset. They have a certain, because, you know, they just refuse to, you know,
To be a little
open their mind to, you know. And to me, I look at psychedelics as spiritual medicine. That's what it is, you know. And it's been suppressed by big pharma for centuries, right?
Yeah, the thing that psychedelics do, and that you touched on earlier, you know, say versus say something like an SSRI, is like, you know, SSRIs may make you feel, you know, better temporarily for a bit, you know, and sometimes they work out long term for some people, but they
But they're all
definitely
designed. They're all designed for you to want more. You need more. I want less. Like I
and
want to get better. I don't want to
they
be on a long-term prescription for, you know, the rest of my life. You
and they
know,
don't necessarily induce that empathy component. Whereas
no,
if you look at the psychedelics and the studies on psychedelics, that's what, you know, people say is that they're a lot more empathetic, they're more open-minded after they use them. Whereas, you know, you don't get that as much with the SSRI. So, you know, that's where, you know, I agree with you that it's more of a spiritual type of medicine. And also too, you know, like we've kind of briefly chatted about, is when you use psychedelics, then you're kind of leaving some of the healing up to yourself, because you know that you have to do the
yes,
work and go through the journey. Whereas, you know, when you're taking SSRIs, it's just sort of like hoping that it hits the right receptors, that it increases your serotonin, and that, you know, you don't necessarily have to do anything or add anything to it to make the medicine work, which is, you know, which is not
well,
correct.
and you know, we can start talking about functional medicine now because they can actually, um, you know, delve even deeper than your typical, you know, medical doctor, right? Because they can look at your microbiomes, they can look at chemistry, they can look at food intake, what foods are good for you, which foods aren't, you know, how you can heal from autoimmune diseases from just food, you know, plant-based medicine, you know, all that stuff. So, you know, I think we're on the cusp of something, you know, really big here, and that includes psychedelics.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Yeah,
that, you know, in addition to the lifestyle interventions you mentioned, like nutrition and exercise, you know, we got to add psychedelics into the mix as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
And Theo, time's gone by like super quick, so we're almost up here now. So can you just let everyone know where they can find you online and how they can connect?
Yes, for sure. My website is theofleury.life. I'm also on Patreon, which is a new thing that I just sort of started to try to reach out to more people, help more people. You know, we're doing a lot of, you know, video stuff. We're doing a lot of live streaming stuff and all kinds of stuff around this, the space of trauma, mental health, and addiction. And just really trying to create that community of people that we can all heal together, you know. And so, you know, that's been really fun. That's been exciting. And you know, I run a group online of 200 people twice a month, and to watch these people sort of transform themselves has just been incredible to be able to facilitate stuff like that. So, and I'm on all social media platforms. So at Theo Fleury 14.
Awesome. Well, Theo, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really commend you on, overcoming your own addiction. And not only that, now you want to help everyone else who was feeling like the way you were at some point. So,
Mhm.
really, really noble thing that you're doing. I highly, highly respect it. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and thanks for all the good work that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. Take care.